So, okay, so I think at 6:30 we'll start. Um, all right, so welcome everyone to our Understanding Obesity as a Chronic Disease webinar. I'm thrilled to have you join me today for an insightful and impactful discussion on a topic that affects millions worldwide, which is obesity. Um, every day, there are headlines about new breakthroughs in obesity treatment and stories about weight bias and stigma that people with obesity face. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Minnie Cruz-Tolentino. I'm a board certified family medicine physician with over 16 years of experience. And in the last several years, I have specialized into this field of medicine called obesity medicine. Now, just a reminder, while I am a physician, I'm not your physician. And today's webinar is just for general educational purposes. So no medical advice will be given here. In today's webinar, I want to provide awareness about obesity as a chronic disease. It's really an exciting time in the field of medicine with all these new treatments that are coming out. Obesity medicine is an emerging and rapidly growing field in healthcare. Yet many people are really unaware of its existence and significance. Specialized area focuses on the comprehensive treatment and prevention of obesity. It addresses the complex factors that contribute to this condition, including genetics, behavior, and environment. And as more people really realize how obesity affects our health, it's really clear that we need more experts in this field. And today I'd like to share my learning objectives with you and discuss how we can really advance our understanding of obesity. And let's define what obesity is and why is this just happening now, and how is obesity as a chronic disease, and that it's a multi-system disease associated with many complications. When the American Medical Association declared obesity as a chronic disease in June of 2013, it made headlines and sparked a lot of debate. Despite many other organizations like the World Obesity Federation, the US FDA, and other various global entities recognizing obesity as a disease, there was still a lot of back and forth about whether is it really a disease or it's just a risk factor. And this controversy really got everyone thinking, what is really a disease? If you look at disease, the word disease in the Webster Dictionary, it's a condition that impairs normal function, has consistent signs and symptoms, and it causes illness, right? So clearly, obesity meets these criteria. Obesity disrupts normal bodily function. It presents with recognizable symptoms, and it can lead to various health issues. So really, by definition, obesity qualifies as a disease. Now, how is obesity as a disease? It is a dysfunction in the brain. It's a dysfunction of the neuroendocrine regulation of appetite and energy functions. It's kind of a mouthful there, but what is neuroendocrine function? It's such a big word, but basically it's just how your brain and hormones work together. So basically the brain and hormones work together to control many of our body's processes. So what happens is that your brain sends signals to certain glands in your body, which then releases hormones. And these hormones are the ones that help to regulate things like growth, metabolism, and even stress response. So essentially, the brain neuroendocrine regulation is a communication system between our nervous system and our endocrine function. Now, I recently went to a conference with Obesity Medicine Association, and this is a slide that really stood out to me. I think it's because of the time factor. In less than 6 years, nearly half of Americans will have obesity, and I think that's quite a map there. And this number doesn't even include people who have pre-obesity or those that are overweight. And according to the WHO, there are more than 1 billion people living now with obesity. 650 million of those are adults, 340 million are adolescents, and 39 million are children. So it is a serious disease, but it is a treatable chronic disease, right? Let's now look at the definition of obesity, and there's one that I really like with the OMA, or the Obesity Medicine Association. They defined obesity as when excess body fat builds up in a way that it messes up with your health. So interestingly enough, that definition doesn't really mention BMI, or body mass index, because when you ask people how to define obesity, they will base it on BMI. But BMI isn't really the best way to define obesity, because it just looks at your height and weight. It really ignores other important factors like muscle mass, bone density, or fat, where it's located. So for example, you can have a muscular person who may be labeled as overweight or have obesity, even though they're healthy, but they just have that heavier muscle mass, as opposed to people with less muscle and more fat. They can have that healthy weight, but the composition of their body isn't really healthy. So BMI doesn't really give us a full picture of your health, right? So we should really look at BMI just as a screening tool in how to classify obesity, but not really define it. There's been a lot of talk in the media and in the medical field about issues with BMI, because of the limitations. Other limitations also include ethnicities. So for Asians, there's certain ethnic groups. For Asians, for example, it could be underrepresented, and whereas in Black people, it could be overrepresented. It could overrepresent their health risk. So for non-Asians, more than 25 kilograms per meter squared, which BMI is considered overweight, as opposed to Asians. More above 23 is already considered pre-obesity, and more than 25 kilogram per meter squared is already obesity in the Asian population. Another limitation is sex, right? It doesn't account for, BMI does not account for sex, meaning male or female. It doesn't recognize that men generally tend to have more muscle mass than women. Age is another factor. It overlooks age. And as we age, muscle mass can decrease. As when we turn, starting at the age of 40, our muscle decreases by 1%. And that can lead eventually later on to a condition called sarcopenia, where someone might have the same BMI, but have a lot more body fat and less muscle. Another limitation is the stage of life. Take, for example, menopause. The body composition changes significantly during this stage of life in women. So really, we should look at BMI just as a screening tool. There are other ways to diagnose obesity, and one of them is waist circumference. It's actually a much more accurate estimate of metabolic health than BMI alone. So looking at numbers here, for non-Asians, the waist circumference over 40 inches for men and over 35 inches for women shows an increased metabolic risk. These are just tools or devices or technologies that have evolved throughout time, where we can measure total body composition. You see this bod pod, it's actually the gold standard in determining total body composition. There's been significant improvements in what we call bioelectrical impedance analysis, where measurement of that these devices can measure fat percentage fairly accurately. In the past, we've used those calipers, which is often very uncomfortable and quite embarrassing to some patients, right? So it's kind of nice that technology has evolved so we can figure out the total body composition. The DEXA scan is another tool, another device, device to measure total body composition. And body composition analyzer scales. Sometimes you probably see them in gyms and weight loss clinics. And you can even have one at home where it can have the analysis weighing scale that has that bioimpedance scale in your weighing scale. BMI shouldn't be used as anything to limit care or access for any effective treatment of obesity. So it's really quite controversial because a lot of these drugs that are out there in the market, use BMI as marker or tool, I guess, or marker, I guess that would be the word, to kind of determine whether a patient would be eligible for some of these newer medications that are out there. Just wanted to show you what this J curve look like. It's really a relationship between an elevated BMI and all-cause mortality. So what is a all-cause mortality? It means it's the total number of people who die from any cause in a certain group over a specific time. So it counts every possible reason for death, not just one specific cause. So it just means basically that as you increase your BMI, we also see an increase in all-cause mortality. And you have to look at this where they start at a BMI of 25, not even 30. So what it also is saying is that the longer your BMI is elevated, the higher the health risk. To put that in analogy in terms of smoking, right? The longer you smoke, the longer your risk. The longer your BMI is elevated, the higher your health risk. So now let's just say, okay, we made the diagnosis of obesity. What next, right? However, the problem lies too in many healthcare providers are really not treating obesity as the disease that it is. There was a survey that was done regarding this, and the top 5 and these list the top 5 reasons why healthcare providers may not really initiate this discussion during an office visit. And the number one answer is time. And I can really attest to that as a primary care physician. I can relate that time is such an important factor. You have you're only given a certain amount of time during an office visit and many things to discuss. And unfortunately, weight loss or discussion about obesity, even though it's serious chronic disease, it does get deprioritized during that visit. Often things too, providers will say things like, well, I really don't think my patient is motivated to lose weight, or my patient isn't really interested to losing weight. But when you really think about it, with other diseases like hypertension or type 2 diabetes, we don't ask our patients if they're motivated to treat their high blood pressure or their diabetes. We just really address them because we know they're serious, because the patients know they're serious. So if we treat obesity as a chronic disease, as would we treat hypertension, as we would treat type 2 diabetes, we really should start to have these conversations with our patients, and our patients also should start this conversation with their healthcare providers. Obesity is also our other pandemic. We've been seeing a huge increase across the globe over the last 4 to 5 decades. And the big question is, why is this happening now, right? So we already know, we know that there's a strong genetic component to this disease. Back in the 1970s and 80s, researchers were trying to find that one particular obesity gene. But they found that there's not just one gene. There are multiple versions of genetic sequences in a particular region in chromosomes that increases your patient's risk or person's risk for an elevated BMI. So it's really more complex than we had thought. It's not just that one gene. So that's one factor, right? Also, but what else has changed in the last 40 to 50 years? There's been a change in behavior of people. There's decreased in physical activity. There's a change in how we sleep, dietary preferences. There's also a change in our gut microbiome, and children are being born later in life. change in physiology. There's also been a lot of change in terms of medications. A lot of these medications that have come about in the last 4 to 5 decades, they have a propensity to cause weight gain. And on top of this, we haven't even touched on environmental changes as well. There's easier access to calorie dense foods, as well as there's chemicals and hormones in our food. Now, I think also in the light of the last 5 years with the pandemic, food comes to us now. There's that probably has catapulted an increased rise of obesity in the last, just in the last 5 years. So, there's just not one thing causing the rise in obesity. It's really very complex and multifactorial. But this is kind of a neat slide, just to kind of showcase how genetic factors can affect a person's response to the environment, and it showcases how inheritable obesity is. Here we see identical twins who are more likely to be similar in body type and composition. Genetic factors affect how a person responds to their environment. So here we see identical twins, right? And it really gives us a good idea of how obesity is inheritable, because identical twins have the same genes. They're raised in different environments, but often identical twins end up with similar body weights, showing that genetics play a big role. And research suggests that up to 70 to 80% of BMI can be elevated BMI can be inherited. So the genetic factor does play a huge impact on whether someone might be prone to obesity. Genes is not the only cause, but environmental and lifestyle still matter. We go back to just talking about obesity, how it's really a disease of the brain, and it's not as simple as calories in and calories out to maintain certain weight. There's a part of our brain called the hypothalamus where weight regulation happens, and it gets hormone signals from all over the body, whether you're going to maintain the weight, whether you're hungry, whether you're full, or even how much calories we absorb. There are strong signals from many different parts of our body, from the stomach to the small intestine, large intestine, our pancreas, and even fat cells. They send signals to the brain. And these parts of our body influence whether we're hungry, we're full, or it even tells us how, it even influences how we look at food and how it tastes. And many of these things happen or occur, and it's not in our conscious control. So now we figure out a lot of the hormones that affect our eating habits. And the thing is that these have been key targets for these weight loss research for medications. And what we're observing now, there's a lot of many drugs for obesity in the pipeline. What we're seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to be seeing more in the next several years. There's this study, it's an old study called the Smithman study that has been replicated many times. And it really shows us what happens when someone with the obesity gene loses weight. So basically in 2011, there were 50 patients who either had pre-obesity or is overweight or obese or have obesity, and they were put in a very low calorie diet and had lost weight. Now, hormone levels were checked before the start of this study, and then they checked it at the end of the study. And what was found that even at 62 weeks later, there was an increase in hormones that increases hunger, which is ghrelin, and it decreased in a hormone that makes you feel full, which is leptin. I don't know if you recall, but that show The Biggest Loser. There was actually a Biggest Loser trial, and they found that 8 years after these contestants had gained back a lot of the weight that they lost on the show. And what they found, the researchers found, was that their metabolism had slowed down, and it made it really hard for them to burn calories and keep the weight off. What happened was the slowdown, it's called metabolic adaptation. And what metabolic adaptation is basically your metabolism slowing down even after you lose weight. It makes it harder for you to burn the calories. It's like your body is trying to save energy and really trying to hold on to the weight, even if you're eating well and exercising. So it's really tough to keep that weight off over time. So it just really, the study highlights how it's really tough to maintain the weight loss, especially even after extreme dieting and exercise. So that brings us to this kind of like slide. There's this tug of war with obesity. Your body and brain strive to get you to gain the weight back. You hear over and over, weight loss is to reduce calories, increase activity. But really the issue is how to stop the body from regaining the weight, or how do you maintain that weight loss? In my practice, when I see a patient for the first time, that's what I start to talk to them about. Yes, you're here for weight loss, but we really have to start thinking about maintenance from day one, because weight loss is hard, but weight maintenance is much more challenging. This metabolic adaptation that happens is like a tug of war, and the harder that you pull back in reducing your calories, the harder the brain tries to pull back the other way to get back to your weight set point. And this is really what happens when you have the disease of obesity. Now, those people who don't have the gene of obesity, they are able to lose the weight by just adjusting their calories and increase their physical activity. But those people with obesity, their brain really controls them. As said by Dr. Kaplan, he was the former president of the Obesity Society, overeating does not cause obesity, but obesity causes overeating. Now, this slide just kind of showcases that obesity is a multi-system disease. It's associated with many complications, and we know it has a strong effect on our heart and metabolism. We know that there's an increase in heart disease and type 2 diabetes, as well as high cholesterol in patients with diabetes. So doesn't it make sense that if we treat obesity, these diseases can be treated as well? Also touch on cancer. The risk, obesity increases cancer risk. There are 13 cancers associated with obesity, such as breast cancer, uterine cancer, and colon cancer. Oncologists actually would tell their patients to prevent recurrence of the cancer, we need to treat their obesity. So these are just some examples, and just to highlight that really treating obesity, we can effectively treat many of these diseases. So the larger amount of weight loss, the more effect that we see in terms of improving health outcomes. So, really this is just a talk about how I wanted to show that obesity is a serious long-term issue with many factors, and that we really should look at obesity as a chronic disease as we see hypertension, which is high blood pressure, or type 2 diabetes as a chronic disease. And we should really start to have these conversations with our patients, or vice versa. Our patients should start to have these conversations with our healthcare providers. What's encouraging now is that we're seeing this kind of wellness movement, and there's so many things that are coming in the pipeline in terms of treatment for obesity. So it's all very exciting. Thank you all for taking the time to attend today's webinar. I hope you found the talk valuable and informative. Your participation really means a lot, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Have a great day.